The year is 2019, and the Gamecube, which came out in 2001, is still getting cool new mods and updates. The Swiss team, in collaboration with Citrus 3000 PSI, released an update which now adds the ability for SD cards to be able to be read from the previously unused serial port number 2. So in this video, let's talk about the new mod, how it works, as well as some great updates that were made to Swiss. So before we get started, I want to thank PCBWay for sponsoring this video. PCBWay is where I went when I needed PCBs for this mod. PCBWay was able to get these printed and delivered to me within a week, which is absolutely amazing. Anyway, I want to thank PCBWay for making these high quality PCBs for this episode. So I want to get right into the mod before we get into some of the background surrounding it. Getting this put together is fairly simple to do, and really just some good soldering technique is required. I typically add flux to the pads for the microSD slot first. From there, I add some solder to those pads, and then I heat it up with my hot air rework station. From there, I just place the SD card over the pads and apply some more heat with my hot air rework station to get it aligned perfectly. From there, I'll run my soldering iron over some of the leads off the microSD card slot, just to make sure that I've got proper adhesion between there and the actual PCB. If you don't have a hot air rework station, the process is pretty similar. Usually I start by applying some flux, adding the microSD card slot, and then go ahead and adhere one of the legs to the actual pad. I'm going to use leg 8 over here. Once the leg's been soldered in place, next I'm going to solder one of the ground pads that holds the microSD card in place. Once that's done, I'm going to solder the rest of the legs off the microSD card slot back down to the PCB. If you end up bridging a few pins, not a big deal. Just go ahead and work the solder around with your soldering iron, add more flux as necessary, and use something like I'm using over here to clean the tip of your soldering iron, which will naturally take some of the solder off of your board. From there, we just flip the board over and install the capacitor on the other side. This is fairly simple, and as long as you got a pair of tweezers, you're probably good to go. The last step, and arguably one of the most important, is to clean up all your flux. To do that, I just use a toothbrush and some IPA and scrub it all off. With all the hard work out of the way, the next step is to get this installed into your console. I'm going to install this into my Metroid Prime themed Gamecube, which if you missed the video on this one, make sure you check it out, card in the upper right hand corner. But getting installed is super easy. All we need to do is pull the serial port 2 cover off the bottom. Make sure we place the SD2SP2 board in there correctly. You can tell because the board will say one way faces in and one way faces out. Based upon my discussion with Citrus 3000 PSI, the hardware side of the mod was fairly simple and straightforward. Effectively, it just ports the pinout from the serial port 2 to microSD. The mod works identically to the SD Gecko, which is a device that allows the SD card to be used in a memory card slot of the Gamecube. The advantage to this is it hides the mod and it allows you to keep both your memory card slots. However, according to Citrus 3000 PSI, the real magic happens on the Swiss side. So let's fire up that Gamecube and get us into Swiss. Now this mod isn't fully plug and play. You're going to need either a mod chip or some other way to launch Swiss. I personally consider using a Xeno GC mod chip to be the easiest way to do it. If you're curious how to install one of those mod chips, make sure to check out the card in the upper right hand corner. So just for example purposes, I'm going to launch an old version of Swiss and let you guys experience what it was like to have full motion video play. As you can clearly see, not the greatest experience. Now let's pull up the most up-to-date version of Swiss as of recording this video. That's such a better experience. Now I'm going to line up the two versions on the left and on the right, and you'll be able to see a clear difference in the total time it takes to run the opening FMV for the game. I spoke to Extremes about why this is, as he works on the Swiss team with EmuKid, and basically they were able to better utilize system resources to buffer the playback of games from SD cards. The Swiss code was reworked to allow for it to hook into the multitasking kernel to find idle time for reading and using data address breakpoints on the queued DVD commands for certain edge cases. In other words, this allows for much smoother full motion video playback that wasn't previously possible. To make sure Mario Kart Double Dash wasn't just a fluke, I also tested it on a couple other notorious games that had chugged during their FMV openings, specifically Super Mario Sunshine and Fire Emblem. Both of these games absolutely stuttered like crazy during their FMV intros and now play smooth as butter. I also spoke to Extrems about the SD2SP2 and how it works from a software standpoint. Extreme said it was fairly easy to implement into Swiss, as Swiss already had full access to the hardware, and the team added an additional loop to Swiss to deploy Serial Port 2. Now the interesting part of this is Serial Port 2 does not have the ability to device detect. So when thinking about it from a software side, Extremes equated it to the SD card being detected as essentially yelling into the void and hoping for a response back. Now me personally, one thing that I did notice is that I do get better compatibility with some other SD cards that didn't work with my SD Gecko. The only issue I found with the SD2SP2 was when you use some legacy homebrew. Some legacy homebrew is configured for the SD Gecko and not configured for the SD2SP2. Now I know a lot of the homebrew is getting reworked to implement that feature, such as CleanRip, which recently just released a new version, but some of the other emulators and things of that nature currently do not have that feature enabled. So hopefully that gets enabled in the future, but otherwise for actual playing of GameCube games, it's an absolutely fantastic option. So overall, this mod is absolutely awesome and something I would definitely recommend. I also want to thank Citrus 3000 PSI for giving me some background on the mod and making the Gerber files for his PCB available to everybody. I also want to thank Extrems for taking the time to talk to me about how everything works on the software side. I've left links for both of these guys in the description below. Make sure you check out Dan's web store and check out the GitHub for both Swiss and for Extrems' website, and also check out his Patreon. And make sure you support people like this. The work they do is absolutely fantastic, and I really appreciate everything they do for the community. I happen to make a few extra of these SD2SP2s as it relates to this video. If you want, I've listed a few extra of those on my Etsy store, so feel free to check them out there. But with all that being said, I want to thank you guys very much for checking out this video. Make sure you guys check out the links in the description below for these guys, and I'll catch you guys for the next one here soon.